Okay, I think we can start. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the EDF and ANEC webinar on Introduction to Standardization. I would like to thank all the participants today for joining, for your interest. I would also like to thank our partners ANEC for co-organizing this event. I thank also our speakers, who I will introduce shortly, and also our interpreters for sign interpretation, Lisa and Gerdinand, and our captioner today, Wim. Also, I thank my colleagues Marie, Alejandro, and Raquel for their support with this event. Just to briefly let you know why we decided to do this webinar is because standardization, as we know, is very important in our daily lives, from all the appliances and products that we use that we take for granted. They are developed through standardization, but very often the process of standardization is quite a complicated one, and we want our members at EDF and ANEC and consumers generally to be involved in the process of standardization. But since the processes are not very clear and sometimes confusing or complicated, not a lot of consumers are able to engage in the process. So we try to make this process easier by the similar trainings as today. And in particular, because the European Commission just issued a draft request for standardization to the European standardization organizations in support of the European Accessibility Act, involvement in standardization is even more important right now. To go to the next slide. I will shortly present the agenda for today. So we have three speakers today. We have Chiara Giovannini, who is the Deputy Secretary of ANEC, who will provide a general introduction to standardization, how it works, also how ANEC and its members work on it. Then we have the chair of SAGA, which is the Strategic Advisory Group on Accessibility, who will present SAGA's role on standardization and in support of the standardization for the European Accessibility Act. Then we will have a 10-minute break, and then our head of policy, Alejandro Moledo, will talk about particularly the involvement of EDF and also persons with disabilities in standardization. Of course, we will have question and answers opportunity after each speaker and at the end of the webinar. Going forward to the next slide, we have the housekeeping rules. As participants, you are all muted. There's a chat box for technical questions and the Q&A box for content questions. So if you have any questions for the speakers, please send them through the Q&A box. If you have any issues with your connection or accessing something, please send them through the chat box. To ask for the floor, use the chat box or raise by hand. But ideally, if possible, send your questions in written form through the Q&A. This session is being recorded and we will share the accessible video after summer, possibly on our website. And there is also a post-event survey which will be launched automatically after the webinar is finished. So we will appreciate if you take the time to give us some feedback on today's event. Going forward, I will just let you know that today, as mentioned, we have captioning and international sign interpretation. We have the captioning main language is in English, but we have received some requests to the registration form for Czech, Turkish, and Spanish languages, so they're also available. What you need to do is open the link which Raquel shared in the chat box for the captioning, and then you will go to a web page, and on the top left corner of this page, there is a tap on text icon. You click on the icon and there's a new list of small icons, and one of them is a flag. When you click on the flag, you will see the different languages available to you. Okay, so before I give the floor to our first speaker, very quickly to introduce our speakers today. Marie, can we go to the next slide? So as I said, the first speaker will be Chiara Giovannini. She's worked for ANEC since 2002 in different positions. Currently, she's a senior manager, policy and innovation, and deputy secretary general, and also leads ANEC's work on accessibility in digital society. and she holds a master's degree in European law. We also have today Malin Rik, who is the chair of the Strategic Advisory Group on Accessibility, or SAGA. She is also the head of the Norwegian Authority for Universal Design on ICT and holds a master's degree in law. And finally, we have our own, very own Alejandro Moledo, who is the head of policy at EDF. He also coordinates our work towards the European Parliament and supports the disability intergroup and focuses on political participation, e-accessibility, assistive technologies, among other topics. And he holds degrees in political and corporate communication as well as journalism. So without taking more time from you, I will pass on the floor to our first speaker, who is Chiara Giovannini. The floor is yours, Chiara.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are very pleased to have you. And I'm going to share with you a little introduction to standardization. Next, I will first introduce ANEC to you in case you're not familiar with it. Then what is standardization and how does it work? And finally, we're going to have a look at the main existing accessibility standards. Next. Next. You might be familiar with the concept of the single market. This area in Europe where products, services, persons, and capitals can freely circulate. I say Europe because it's not only about the European Union, but it is also about the EA countries and some accession countries. How is it possible that the goods can freely circulate in Europe? Because they have to respect certain rules, and the legislation on those rules is following a specific legislative technique, which is called the new approach. Next. The European legislator is setting the essential safety requirements through the horizontal and sectorial European laws. It's the requirement that products have to follow. The European standards organizations, CENELEC and ETSI, are invited through a request to develop the European standards that can provide the technical details to support the implementation of the legislation. These mandated requested European norms or standards are called Harmonized Standards when their reference is published in the official journal of the European Union. They are linked to legislation. They are called harmonized because they harmonize the situation in the so-called internal market. Next. The standards, when they are harmonized, they are linked to legislation, but they are voluntary. The manufacturers have an interest in using the standards because the standards, they provide a presumption of conformity with the legislation. So if the product is conforming to the standards, there is a presumption of conformity with the legislation the standards are linked to. And a product in compliance with the legislation is free to circulate in the European Economic Area or the single market. Next. There is, however, a problem because this legislative technique is a model of co-regulation, of private-public partnership. European standardization is a private activity, and it is based on national delegations. We will then explain to you what it means. The participation of all national stakeholders is encouraged in the development of the European standards, but the reality is that bigger business has the most to gain from influencing the process and therefore is putting more resources into the standardization process. As far as consumers and persons with disabilities, the expertise in standardization is fragmented or is very absent. Next. So consumer participation and its consumer of all ages and abilities has been coordinated in ANEC via ANEC since 1995. ANEC is the Association for the Coordination of Consumer Representation in Standardization. On the slide, there is a little picture of, it's a cartoon of a lady facing many industry representatives, and they happen to be all male, with quite a lot of muscles and a certain, I would say, aggressive posture. And it is to show the lack of balance that we face in standardization when we represent consumers and persons with disabilities. Next. What is standardization and how does it work? I'm going to repeat again those basic concepts that I have explained to you and which are at the heart of the creation of ANEC, but that are also very relevant in the context of the standards under the European Accessibility Act. Many goods and services in Europe fall under the single market regulations, and the European Accessibility Act is one of those legislation. It means that the legislation is defining the basic safety requirements in the directives. The technical solutions are left to the European standards and the standardization organization, and the voluntary standards complement European legislation. This is what the European Accessibility Act is about. And we have the same for toys, we have the same for domestic appliances, we have the same for mobile phones, for computers, for most of our consumer goods and services. Next. A standard is a document. It is a voluntary agreement based on the consensus amongst economic actors, and I put actors and not operators, because a market is composed of demand and offer. We consumers are the demand and the offer is made by the business. And together we are the actors of the market, and we also have to be the actor of the standardization process. It is approved by a recognized body. In Europe, we have CEN, CENELEC and ETSI as recognized bodies. And a standard is establishing important criteria for products, services and processes. And I put a photo in the slide of one very well-known standard, the first harmonized standard on accessibility, and it is the one on the accessibility requirements for ICT products and services. And this is the first version of 2014, and it was published by ETSI, but also by CEN and CENELEC. Next. In order to have a standard, we need to follow a process. The standardization process is quite formalized. We have a request by the European Commission, and we are going to mention later on what it is about. We have a group of experts drafting and deciding about the standard. It's called a technical committee. The final deliverable is a draft standard. The standard is undergoing a so-called inquiry and voting, and this is happening at the national level. This is why we want you to get involved at the national level. Once approved, a standard is published. And I put a photo of another important standard in my slide, and this is the standard about design for all, accessibility following a design for all approach in products, goods and services. Those standards are, this standard is one of the second of the third one on accessibility, and they are all very relevant in the framework of the European Accessibility Act. And Alejandro will better explain in his presentation later on. Next. I was mentioning the voting of standard, and I mentioned several times the word national delegation. It means that although we are in the presence of a European standard, the vote is done by each country at the national level in each standardization body. This principle is also very similar to the principle of the single market and how Europe is created, with member states being member of the European Union. It's an essential principle, but it is insufficient in terms of consumer participation. And I can make an example. The example is of toy safety. We have 6 experts and we have 34 countries represented in ANEC. The experts are dealing with consumer issues in SENELEC. They come from national countries, but it means that the other remaining countries, the 28 national delegations, do not have consumer expertise. So what we do is we federate this consumer expertise in order to be then valid for all the other countries where there is no consumer expertise. And I made the example of toy safety, but we could make the example of accessibility and it would be very similar. Next. It means that without ANEC and EDF, there would be no effective consumer representation in standardization because of the lack of participation at the national level. We need to compensate it at the European level. Next. Next. We can now have a look at the specific rules on the approval of a standard. However, in the interest of time, I will just mention the main points, and you have received and you will receive in the future the slides, and I'm happy to take any questions in the chat later on. As I mentioned, we need a proposal for a standard. This proposal can be accepted or not, and as consumers, we can support it or not. Once accepted, what is important is that the national work on the same topic has to stop or to be withdrawn. This is called the Standstill Principle, and it is what creates this harmonization of requirements and therefore the single market. The drafting is done in a group of experts called a working group. And as consumers, we can submit comments, etc. We then have the formal phase of approval, and I mentioned to you the inquiry and the formal vote. I won't go into the details because it's quite time consuming, but you need to know that there are very specific rules. Next. Next. After the formal vote, there is the publication of a standard. And then we have a revision because a standard has to be kept updated. And especially when a standard is dealing with technologies, new technologies, for example, it can become outdated quite quickly. And ANEC can, and consumers can always ask for an update of such standards. Next. From the quick overview of the development process, you can realize that the moment where we can be more effective is at the beginning of the process, the proposal and the acceptance and the drafting. After that phase, the formal voting of the standard, the formal approval, is generally too late to change something in the standard if we don't like it. So we can consider that the chances of influencing the content of a standard are like an inverted pyramid, with the base being the proposal, the acceptance, and the drafting of the standard. And then the tip of the pyramid, the inverted tip of the pyramid, is the publication of the standard, of course. Next. All the rules about the standards that are providing presumption of conformity with the legislation are codified in a standardization regulation, a European standardization regulation, number 1025. It entered into force in 2013, and it is giving the framework for the development of the standards in support of union legislation and policies. Important to note recital 24, because the European standardization system should fully take into account the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Next. The process for the request of standards by the European Commission is codified in specific articles of the regulation. Again, I'm not going to mention all of them, but just for you to know that we have specific rules on the planning of the work, on the consultation of the stakeholders, and then on the adoption by the member states of a standardization request. According to specific rules, again, I'm not going to go into the legal details, but you need to know that everything is codified, and I'm happy to take any questions later on if you feel the need to know more about it. And when I say codify and formal, it means that it's an occasion for us to influence the process because there is a decision-making phase. Next. The standardization request is an invitation to the European standards organizations to develop a standard or a series of standards. It is a tool to get standards in support of the EU legislation or policies. And it is also a tool, a way for member states to give political and technical support for standardization activities. A request is not legally binding. It means that the ESOs can reject it. They are free to respond, but if they accept it, they have to deliver. They commit to deliver. The standardization request is a precondition for the citation of a standard in the official journal of the European Union. And the citation is the mentioning of the reference of the standard that is providing presumption of conformity to a given legislation. Next. Now, let's conclude and let's have a look at the main accessibility standards. Next. I already mentioned the first one because it's the first harmonized standard providing presumption of conformity with the Web Accessibility Directive, the standard on the accessibility requirements of ICT products and services. We also have supporting documents of this standard, guidelines on the use of accessibility award criteria in public procurement. Next. We also have the standard I was mentioning before on design for all. We are going to have a future standard on transport services, customer communications for passenger transport services, a universal design approach. We have another guidance, very well known, Guide 6 on addressing accessibility in standards. And finally, next, we can mention the important body of standards on accessibility to the built environment. We have a published European standard, two almost published technical reports on built environment conformity assessment. We have an international standard on accessibility of the built environment, and we have one standard on accessibility of lifts. Those standards, they all exist, and they will be very useful in the future request underpinning the Accessibility Act. Next. Let me conclude by stressing the importance of design for all in standardization. What does it mean? When we draft a standard, we have to ask ourselves who may use the product, the system, or the service. And this is the concept of foreseeable use against intended use. Can the product service be accessed, understood, and used by a wide range of people? Is the standard about design protocols, technical requirements, or processes? This is quite specific, but we can have different kinds of standards. And then how can accessibility following a design for all approach can help in the drafting of a standard? Next and final slide. I always like to conclude the presentation by perhaps making you think out of the box a little bit. There is a lot of discussion about innovation because innovation is seen as one of the main drivers of the EU economic recovery. Innovation is considered as a synonym or contributing to competitiveness. Innovative ideas can be turned into new products and services that create growth, quality jobs, and help address the societal challenges that we are facing. Innovative products and services can have different design and can be disruptive. And accessible products and services can have a different design and can be disruptive. Therefore, accessibility and innovation can go hand in hand. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have right now or later on. And as Mer was saying, you can ask your question in the Q&A, and I have a couple of questions. Mer, would you like to introduce the questions, or are you happy for me to take them?
Yes, I'm just mindful of the time because we need to complete this session at 1:15. So I would propose maybe to take the first question, and then the second we can address after all Alejandro and Malin also complete their presentations. Is it okay?
Yes. So the first question I have is about the other two legislations that are currently being discussed in the Parliament and the Council. It's the Digital Services Act and the Digital Market Act. And the question is ANEC going to be involved? And do we know whether accessibility standards are going to be relevant there? The use of standards in the Digital Services Act is limited to especially B2B relationship for the platforms on how they can create interoperability. We have not assessed yet whether there's going to be a consumer component, but what we have seen is that the reference to standard is a bit strange how it was done by the Commission in their proposals, and we have suggested for a different reference to standard. And we will keep you up to date in case there are some accessibility aspects to the Digital Services Act. I know that Alejandro will intervene later and will explain better other aspects of this new regulation that might be relevant.
Thank you very much, Chiara. I'm also happy later on to take this question if there is need, because I've worked on it a bit. So we can go to the next speaker now. Thank you, Chiara, very much. Our next speaker is Malin Rick, as I mentioned. She is the chair of the Strategic Advisory Group on Accessibility, or SAGA. Marlene, the floor is yours. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. Change the slide, please. I'm going to talk a bit about what SAGA's role is within the European standardization process, and a bit about how SAGA can support the successful development of the Harmonized Standard for the Accessibility Act. New slide. So what is SAGA? SAGA is an advisory group for the European Standardization Organization. It was established by the CEN-BT in 2011, and we normally meet twice a year. Normally we meet in person in Brussels, sometimes in other cities like Milan, but due to the pandemic we have been meeting digitally the last almost 1.5 years. The members in SAGA is members from national standardization bodies. It's from CEN and CENELEC. It's ETSI and user organization. They have all in common that they have some kind of expertise in accessibility when participating in SAGA. So SAGA is advisory and an advisory and coordinating body. So our task is to give advice to the other standardization bodies and groups, either working groups or committees that are well, in work, so to speak, with standardization work. So next slide. So as an advisory and coordinating body to the SEN and SEN-ELEC BTs, we give advice on political and strategic matters related to accessibility. And the aim is to ensure that accessibility is addressed in accordance with the strategic objectives for the European standardization system. And also we want to be the main source of knowledge and expertise on accessibility issues for SEN-ELEC BTs. What we have seen in Saga is that the knowledge about accessibility, but also the expertise on accessibility is not always as high as one would have wished within the different standardization committees. So we try to be somewhere to go for the committees and for others involved in the work to get advice and expertise on this issue. So next slide. So how do Saga work? Well, we promote best practices. I want to emphasize the Saga website. We will put the link in the chat, I think, where you can go and see both our different guidance on the website, but also there are links to different webinars and other things that Saga has put out prior to this. So you can get more knowledge there about this issue. We try to help raising awareness. We have had both training sessions and webinars. And we also follow any EU and national legislative and policy initiatives within relevant topics for accessibility. Saga promotes any new relevant initiatives in the field of accessibility. And the aim here is, of course, to try to raise the awareness that accessibility prevents or removes barriers of mainstream products and services. So one very important topic for Saga is to promote the view that accessibility is not something that is for the few or for very specific topics, but it's something that should go into the mainstream standardization initiatives and work. So if you could give the next slide. Thank you. So Saga has developed a strategy for the next for the 3 years, 20, 21, 22. And the European Accessibility Act is one of 3 major areas that Saga is interested in for this period. In addition to this, we try to give input to the standardization mandate. We sent an input from Saga this spring. And we also try to be the source of best practice and promote user needs also towards the Commission in our input. So. I also want to, if I could just mention very short before I finish off, that we also continue the work on the mandate Design for All to increase awareness of accessibility issues in the European standardization. It was mentioned in the previous presentation, the Design for All, but the Saga has decided to continue the work to promote this work. So I just want to add that in the final part of the presentation. Yes.
Thank you very much, Malin. Thanks a lot. Oh, I see we just had a new question coming in. Okay, maybe since we have, I think, close about 9 minutes before our break, we can still take the question that we had before. Malin or also Chiara, if you want to answer our second question. It was about impact of innovation in relation to accessibility of the built environment on standardization. I think we often look at the question from the other side, how standardization can promote innovation, but from what I understand from the question is how innovation and product invention can affect standardization, and is the standardization system in the EU and agile enough for to allow further innovation? What are your thoughts on this? I don't know if Malin, you want to address, or Chiara, because it's not addressed to any of the speakers in particular.
Maybe Chiara, if you want to go first, you're welcome. If not, I can give my thoughts. Well, the question, as I understand it,
it's quite complicated.
It's a very complicated question, but I think that within the accessibility as a topic, it also lies the big possibility for innovation. And of course, with the new directives and making this also part of the single market, I think the vendors have a very important role also to play to make sure that accessibility actually happens, that this is not just the legislative process, but that it also that we achieve real accessibility, so to say. And in that part, innovation, of course, is very, very important, because it's very important that the accessibility requirements and accessibility as a whole doesn't come after the development of new services and the products, but that it actually is part of the development process. So I don't know if that is an answer to this, but it's more my thoughts.
Yeah, I think that the question itself was quite a philosophical one in a way. So I think Chiara has some connection issues from what I understand.
Yes,
so,
apologies. I just joined. Apologies that there was an issue. I was kicked out and now I'm back.
No.
I would be happy to take any questions if there is still time, and apologies.
Yeah, we have 2 minutes, so maybe you can take the next question. It's about, is there a way to improve financial accessibility of the standardization system? If I want to talk to my national standards body or join a mirror committee. So Chiara, maybe you can talk from the experience of ANEC and its members, how you think the system is financially accessible or not.
It depends very much on the country you are in. As I was mentioning in my presentation, we have these national delegation principles. So each country is organized according to their own rules, although they all contribute to the European system. In some countries, there is support for consumer participation and persons with disabilities participation in standardization, public funding, sometimes also private funding in terms of donations. And sometimes it's not. And what does it mean, the support? What does it cover? Sometimes it covers the expertise. Sometimes it has to cover the fees to join the standardization body. Sometimes it has to cover the travel expenses. From the ANEC side, we can reimburse the travel expenses when we were traveling, and now the connection expenses of our experts. And as I was mentioning, we are based on this solidarity principle that the expertise of one expert is valid for all of Europe, or the expertise of a few experts is valid for all of the countries, also when they don't have themselves this expertise. We are not able to cover the national fees if there are any. But we know that generally speaking, there is an attitude not to apply those fees. So I encourage you to contact at the national level your national standardization body and also your government, and insist for your participation to be done without any financial obstacles. And if you can find additional funding for the expertise, this is the better, but otherwise you can count on us to support you. Together with EDF, we will be very active in the future standardization request on accessibility.
Thank you very much. I can say from EDF that we have the same issue within our membership. Many of the organizations are small, and people working there also are on voluntary basis. So of course, the financial accessibility aspect is quite important when it comes to inclusive participation. And also Alejandro will mention, recently we requested that the accessibility standards are also, we have more financial inclusivity and access to them, but you will go in more detail. And we have just a couple of minutes, so maybe I can take the question on the DSA and DMA, the Digital Services Act and Markets Act, because I've been working on the file a bit. From our point of view, I mean, there are a lot of aspects actually in relation to consumers' direct involvement when it comes to these two regulations, because most of the platforms and services that the DSA, for example, covers are the intermediary services such as hosting platforms, but also online marketplaces or the app stores where we download applications, social media. So these things are some things that consumers directly use. So their accessibility is very important for us. And one of the suggestions that we made was actually that apart from having the same requirements on accessibility, which we have for the Accessibility Act, so that the DSA and DMA are in consistency with the Accessibility Act. We also propose that in case some aspects and elements are not covered by the standards which would be harmonized for the Act, then there could be some technical specifications or standardization done for that purpose. But the process is now ongoing. The Parliament is going to table in amendments. I think the deadline is on Thursday. So we're actively working. And if anybody wants to know more, you can contact me. And I'm happy to share with you more information, also our position paper. I don't see any more questions right now. We're a bit even advanced in time. If any of you, Chiara or Malin, don't want to add anything, then I think we can even go on a break 2 minutes earlier. It's fine for you? Yeah, okay. So I propose to have our 10-minute break extended to 12 minutes or now 11 minutes. And we can be back at 4:25 Brussels time. So in 11 minutes, I will see you back here. Thank you. Okay, so our break is over. I hope you had a nice break and are ready to continue our webinar. So our next speaker is Alejandro Moledo, our head of policy, who will introduce EDF's work on standardization and why generally standardization is important for persons with disabilities and how you can get involved as organizations of persons with disabilities. Thank you. Go ahead, Alejandro.
Thank you very much, Meher, and thank you all for being here today. Let's move on to the next slide. So in my presentation today, in addition to presenting EDF, the European Disability Forum, for those of you who don't know us, I will touch upon why it's important to work on standardization for persons with disabilities and why we should get involved. And then I will present you on how EDF is being active in this domain in standardization in cooperation with ANEC, and how we can support our members to get involved in standardization. So let's start. So very briefly, EDF, the European Disability Forum, we are the umbrella organization representing persons with disabilities at the European level. We are an advocacy organization. We push, encourage the EU institutions and member states to comply with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And I believe we've been one of the very few, unfortunately, DPOs, organizations of persons with disabilities, very, very active on standardization. And I will explain why in a moment. Next slide, please. So why do we work on standardization, and why is this important for persons with disabilities? As Chiara explained, standards are used to harmonize the approach to different products and services in Europe, and also globally as well with international standards. But in the case of accessibility, this is particularly important because think of, for instance, a ramp, for example, how many degrees a ramp should have to be usable by person using a wheelchair, for example. There are many details in accessibility, in implementing accessibility in practice, that we can only achieve by having a harmonized approach that ensures that our rights, accessibility as one of them, is actually implemented in practice. And this enables us to enjoy this freedom of movement, because if we think of, for example, the platforms to access a train, for example, and the train gates, in order for a person with disability to enter independently into a train, this needs to be harmonized so we have an easy access throughout Europe. So standards facilitate the compliance with existing legislation. If we think of the Web Accessibility Directive that we already mentioned, the Web Accessibility Directive says that websites, in order to be accessible, must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. These are the legal mandatory requirements in the legislation. But what does this mean in practice? And this is what the standard, the famous standard that Chiara presented, the standard on ICT, the EN 301549, gives a set of technical requirements which are based on an international standard known as WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. This is what industry uses to ensure that they comply with the mandatory requirements of the legislation. This is why standards are important, because they give also certainty to both industry and users on the level of accessibility that they can be sure that it will be ensured and that they need to provide because of different legislation. So in a way, having these accessibility standards, that can also improve the quality of the products and services, because again, it gives, you know, this common approach to implementing accessibility in practice. Let's move on to the next slide. So why should we get involved? Well, I think we already mentioned that standards affect our everyday lives, from the chargers of our smartphones to the built environment that surrounds us, to the websites, many ICT products and services, all of them, basically. So in our everyday life, even though we may not notice, we are surrounded by products and services which comply with different standards. So to make sure that our needs and that in the case of those standards linked to legislation are well interpreted and implemented in reality, we need to get involved in the technical discussions that define those technical documents that demonstrate compliance with legislation in this case, or that support specific policies, for example, public procurement. So the motto of the disability movement, nothing about us without that, shall also be applied in standardization development. And this is what we are trying very much to do in EDF, even though the system is not as inclusive as we wish. Next slide. So in which groups or in which platforms EDF is active on standardization? First of all, we are proud members of the ANEC Accessibility Working Group, in which obviously we follow the lead of ANEC in this regard in standardization, as they are the main organization representing consumers. And then we also participate in different committees and in different organizations. I would highlight that we are liaison organization in SEN, one of the main standardization, European standardization organizations. We don't have voting rights in this case because, as Chiara explained, their members are national standardization bodies. And then we are members of ETSI, which is the standard organization of ICT, and in which the main members, the members are mostly ICT companies. And in this case, we do have voting rights, but obviously as an NGO, and because of the system they have in place, our votes are very weak compared to big tech companies, which have more votes than us, than ANEC or EDF. Then we are members of SAGA, and Malin already explained the role of SAGA as an advisory body to SEN. And then we are also members of an advisory body to the European Commission, which is the multi-stakeholder platform on ICT and standardization, in which basically yearly we provide recommendations to the Commission on what priorities they could fund, or what priorities the standards bodies will undertake in terms of standards for new technologies. And finally, we are also members of different technical committees, and by technical committees I mean the working groups responsible for the standards that Chiara already introduced, the standard on ICT, the EN 301549, which is that standard that has been harmonized to demonstrate compliance with the Web Accessibility Directive. And we are members also of the technical committee for the built environment, and we were members of the technical committee for the Design for All standard. Next slide. So let's go into, I believe, one of the most important pieces of information of today's webinar, which is the standardization request. For the moment, it's a draft standardization request put forward by the European Commission in support of the European Accessibility Act. Please don't be confused, because in the past we used to call the standardization requests mandates, but now we use this terminology. Anyway, maybe we sometimes the concepts and how we call these technical committees and these procedures are more complicated than they should be. But the standardization request was made public some weeks ago, and the Commission is planning to request the revision of 3 existing standards, the 3 main accessibility standards that we already presented to you, which are the standard on accessibility requirements for ICT products and services, the EN 301549, the standard on accessibility and usability of the built environment, the EN 17210, and the standard on design for all accessibility following a design for all approach in products, goods, and services, extending the range of users. It's a long title. And the code is EN 17161. So as for the first standard, the standard on ICT, this standard was requested by firstly by Mandate 376 in support of public procurement, and then a revision was requested for the Web Accessibility Directive, as we explained. But now with this draft standardization request, the Commission is kind of compiling all of this into one single mandate. So basically, once we have the updated standard EN 301549 for the European Accessibility Act that will also be updated for the Web Accessibility Directive. And this is very important because then we will ensure that in the case of web accessibility, so those technical requirements for websites and mobile applications are coherent between the Web Accessibility Directive and the European Accessibility Act. And why are we revising these standards? Because as you know, the European Accessibility Act covers a broad range of ICT products and services. It includes unfortunately voluntary requirements for the built environment, and also includes accessibility requirements as for services and how services are provided. And therefore, these three standards are relevant. So we will revise them in order to be sure that their technical requirements are in line with what the Accessibility Act is requiring. And let's not forget that what is binding, is mandatory, is the legislation, is the European Accessibility Act, and the national laws that will transpose this directive. But in the end, industry makes use of these technical standards to be sure that they comply with the legislation. So it's very, very important that we get involved in this. Let's move on to the new standards that the Accessibility Act will require. Next slide, please. So in addition to this, to the revision of these three existing standards, the Commission also requests the European standardization organizations to prepare three new standards. One of them will be about the non-digital information related to products. If you remember, or if you've read the European Accessibility Act, there are some requirements as for the instructions of the products. So there are some requirements that affect they don't relate to websites or mobile applications or the information that you can get through digital means. So we need a standard that can specify what accessibility means when this information is provided non-digitally. So we'll have one standard about this non-digital information, and then we'll have a second standard about support services. If you remember, and actually EDF was calling for the inclusion of these in the legislation, when companies covered by the European Accessibility Act provide support services to the customers related to the products or services they put on the market. And by this we mean help desks, call centers, technical support, relay services, training in general to consumers, how to make these services accessible. So this second new standard will touch upon how to make these support services accessible to persons with disabilities. And last, but not least, and very important as well, the Commission is requesting a new standard on emergency communications. So the obligations from the telecommunications operators to the public safety answering points, basically, well, this is called PSAPs, and these are basically the call centers that respond and handle the 112 emergency calls. So it's very important to have this as a separate standard. So these calling centers will handle our emergency calls in an accessible manner, and this ensure interoperability across the EU. So when we travel to another country, we can be certain that when we call 112, we will be able to do it in an accessible manner. Because if it only works in your country, then when you travel, you will be, as it happens today, unfortunately, you will be at your own, and there will be no accessible way to call for help. So as you can see, we'll have development of 6 standards. And again, this is why it is crucial that the disability movement gets very active in the development of the revision of the existing accessibility standards that we already worked on, and the creation of these 3 new standards. Next slide, please. So I think we already explained briefly, Kiara already explained the process. None of these standards for the moment provide presumption of conformity with the Accessibility Act. They are not yet developed and published as for the new ones. So the Commission has recently launched this standardization request. It is a draft, and now the European Standards Organization need to send comments and decide whether they accept or reject this request from the European Commission. Good news is that if in the case that they don't accept, the Accessibility Act foresees a different way to adopt technical specifications that can also give presumption of conformity. So once the European standards bodies have accepted the standardization request, they will develop the standard and they will deliver to the European Commission, and then the Commission will assess if these standards are enough to fulfill the requirements of the European Accessibility Act. And if the Commission considers that this is the case, then they will publish the reference to these standards in the official journal of the EU. And at that moment, we can say that these standards will be harmonized standards. Next slide. Okay, so how we will be involved in in all this gigantic work? So at EU level, we have published already some comments on how we would like this standardization request to be. We sent them before, obviously, the draft was public. And we are happy to see that some of our requests were taken into consideration, being one of them the possibility to have the harmonized standards to be free of charge to disability organizations. EDF is of the opinion that it doesn't make any sense to use public money to develop standards in support of legislation, and then the standards, when these come from SEN and SENELEC, are not free of charge. So we want to have an easy access to those accessibility standards that affect our community. So we gave our inputs to SAGA, to ETSI, to the different technical committees that we are involved. And then we will give, obviously, feedback to the European Commission until September. We believe that will be the deadline of to send comments to this standardization request. But for the moment, we still need to study it in detail, but we are happy with the standardization request, as I mentioned. And then once the work starts, which is what really matters, EDF staff, we will be working at EU level. We will try to be present in the technical committees responsible for the development of these 6 standards, but we will need to nominate technical experts to draft the standards, because obviously this requires a lot of expertise, a lot of technical knowledge in the different domains. So neither Meher or myself, for example, are engineers, so we need to find experts, sometimes in academia, sometimes many times among our already network of experts, to represent us at a technical level and to be on the drafting level, discussing all those nitty-gritty details that will define the standards. And from the Secretariat, from EDF Secretariat, and obviously in collaboration with ANEC, with our members and with other partners such as Aid Platform Europe, we will compile and gather different comments and concerns, and we will make them, we will push for them in the different technical committees. Next slide, please. So at national level, and this is very important, it is fundamental that we coordinate with our national members, and these national members request to be involved in the so-called mirror committees. So at European level, there will be these technical committees, but then at national level, in the national standards bodies, they will create mirror committees responsible for the same standards to compile and send to the European Committee the comments from the country. So it's very important that EDF members at national level can get active in those national discussions, because as Chiara mentioned, then the vote will happen at national level, and we need also to have a say in those discussions. Otherwise, sometimes it's very difficult to influence at European level. And then we will obviously liaise with all our network and expert groups and our members involved in the transposition of the European Accessibility Act, in which toolkit you can already see some of the standards that are relevant and others that may be relevant as well. So we will keep on raising the concerns of our members, both at European and hopefully at national level as well. Next slide, please. So how can we support? Already mentioned some of the actions that we will be undertaking in the coming years. We will prepare obviously technical comments with the help of the technical expert that we will recruit for the technical part of the development of the standard. So usually once the standard is accepted and the technical committee is created, before that, there is also a call for experts, paid experts. So in the past, in the standards that we already presented to you, EDF, we recruited experts, technical experts that can represent us in these more technical discussions. So we will be supporting those experts and to send EDF members' comments to those technical experts as well, and vice versa. And we will ensure that the communication is flowing. We will organize obviously workshops to raise awareness, such as today's workshop, and will provide guidance to our members on how to get involved and what to do at national level if needed. As I just said, in the different toolkits that we've been developing for the EU main accessibility legislation that we've been active, such as the European Accessibility Act or the Web Directive or the Audiovisual Media Service Directive. You can find also important parts related to standardization. And then we will continue liaising with our members for the transposition of the Accessibility Act. We are having peer support meetings, and we will continue doing so in the coming months. Sorry, hopefully not years. And then we will keep on supporting our members and bringing them, when the discussions affect their constituencies, to the technical committees discussing requirements that are relevant. Imagine, for example, requirements as for interoperability with hearing aids. Then in that case, we will obviously liaise with, for example, the European Federation of Hard of Hearing or the European Association of Cochlear Implant Users. So in those cases, obviously, we are very aware of our members' needs and concerns, and we will be contacting them to have their say in the technical discussions as well. And we will keep on participating in workshops and events about these issues, and we will keep on including, again, the EDF members' views in the technical work of the 6 different standardization committees. Next slide, and I think next slide, please. I think that was it. Again, this is a draft standardization request. For the moment, we know that there are 6 standards foreseen by the Commission. We will see by September if this changes. In principle, standardization requests don't change much after comments, unfortunately, but we are fairly happy with it. And something that I forgot to mention is that in principle, what we've seen in the standardization request is that the Commission may use this other way, the technical specifications, as for the requirements concerning ebooks. So the ebooks will not be covered by the revision of the EN 301-549, so the standard on ICT. because the industry, the European publishers, have claimed that the industry standard already complies with the requirements of the Act. That means that instead of reinventing the wheel, the Commission will adopt technical specifications instead. This is for the moment what is it in the standardization request in the draft, and we will see what happens in September. But again, as from next year, we will be working very intensively with you, hopefully in these different standardization requests. And I leave it there if anyone has any question. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Alejandro. This was a very, very good overview of what we plan to do. I hope we can manage all this work. We indeed have some questions. I see that the first questions that was asked, Chiara highlighted that she would like to take it, but maybe Alejandro, you also have thoughts on this, but then we have more questions. I just want to note that we have 8 minutes left until the end of the session. So when you answer, please try to keep it as short as possible. So the first question, if maybe Alejandro, you want to quickly address, and then Chiara, why review the 3 ENs given that they are relatively published recently?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think because in order to harmonize them, so in order to refer to them in the official journal, the Commission must be sure that the requirements in these 3 standards actually fulfill the requirements, the mandatory requirements of the legislation. So the experts should review these standards and see, okay, we need to adapt this, or we need to add new requirements because this was not covered, and so forth. So we knew that this was going to happen, and I think it's normal. I don't know, if, Chiara, if you want to complement.
Yes. The legislation, the Accessibility Act, is containing specific requirements in its annexes, and the standards have to meet those requirements. Those standards were not written with those requirements in mind, and so they need to be revised in that sense.
Thank you very much. We have another question addressed to all speakers, but maybe Malin, you would, I don't see Malin now in the, I don't think Malin is with us now. Okay, so the next question is, you can see who wants to respond because it's addressed to everybody. It says, how do EDF, SAGA, ANEC, SENELEC, and ETSI maximize efforts to harmonize their standards with the ITU standards, which often cover the same areas, for example, emergency communication? Chiara, do you want to go ahead, and then Alejandro maybe?
Yes, ITU is the international body dealing with the telecommunications. They have an arm that is doing standardization. However, they also have another arm which is doing legislation, and the membership of ITU is typical of a UN agency. I think it has even the status of a UN agency, so it's member states. Indeed, there are standards on emergency communications, and ITU has a cooperation agreement, if I'm not mistaken, or at least a channel of communication with ETSI. Whereas SENELEC have a channel of communication and a cooperation agreement with ISO-IC, which are the other 2 international standardization bodies, which don't have the status of UN agencies in the terms that the membership is not of member states. So there is a little bit of an asymmetry there. But of course, collaboration will be made at the technical level in order not to reinvent these standards. But again, we are talking of European Accessibility Act with specific requirements into it, in the annexes of the Act, and the standards have to mirror those requirements. So there is going to be a drafting process, which is inevitable, because there needs to be a symmetry between the Act, the requirements of the Act, and the standards providing presumption of conformity with the Act.
Mm-hmm. I think Chiara's answer was very comprehensive, but Alejandro, do you have anything?
No, nothing to add.
It will be difficult. Okay, great. There is a question about the recommendations. I think it was a file that I shared. which was EDF's recommendations for inclusive European standardization. And the question is, when will this be official? It's an EDF position, so it's already our official position. When Alejandro already mentioned some things that we want that there should not be financial barriers when the standards are published afterwards. They should be free of charge for DPOs, etc. You can follow the link and see the recommendations, but I think this is not something that relates to the request of the European Commission, if I understand the question correctly. Then there is a question which says, yeah, go ahead, Alejandro.
No, I was going to add that we will obviously, once we prepare our comments to the standardization request, to the draft standardization request, we will publish them on our website. Exactly. But this work will be during this the coming months.
Yeah. And also Chiara responded in the chat, but I want to highlight in case somebody missed. Someone was asking when will the request of the Commission be published? Is there a link to access it? For now, not. We have received it and we have shared with our experts and members, but there will be an open process where you will be able to engage. I guess in the coming weeks this link should be available. And we will, of course, inform you further. So there's a question: to what degree are standards used as a case evidence in accessibility claims, either in case pursuit or case defense? So I guess this is about litigation. I don't know if there is already any experience with past laws, if any of you is aware.
So I can answer the question. And first of all, there is a principle that the liability of a manufacturer, especially for safety legislation, is never diminished by the fact that the manufacturer has been following the harmonized standard. That is at the European level. In certain member states or former member states, there are different rules. I don't know whether Colin is from the UK or not, but I know that there are different rules in the UK because liability rules, according to whether it's tort law or not, they have a national base and they are not harmonized at the European level. So there is not an issue of accessibility claims in terms of liability of defect of the product. What we have in the Accessibility Act, and I will let Alejandro continue, is the possibility of complaining because of lack of accessibility. In terms of even association of persons with disability can complain on behalf of an individual consumer. However, we are not into the case of a defective product. And again, the standard is never an excuse. Of course, it could be that the standard is the cause of the complaint because it's not good enough. In that case, there are processing to revise the standard. The member states can do something which is called a formal objection when the standard is still draft, but also when it's already published, and saying it's not good enough, it's not meeting the legal requirements, we need to revise it. And I will let Alejandro complete on the complaints system in the Accessibility Act.
No, I think you already explained it perfectly, Chiara. In the Accessibility Act, there is this possibility for organizations representing persons with disabilities to let's say, claim their rights or the rights of an individual at court. And I believe just the explanation that Chiara gave was already quite comprehensive.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. We have a few more questions, but unfortunately we ran out of time. Did you want to say something?
No, I was going to mention that one of the questions is easy and quick to answer about the self-service terminals, where will they be included in the EN 301-549 in the ICT one? In principle, this will be the case, yes. So this standard already has requirements that are applicable to these type of technologies. And I believe we will revise them to be sure that all elements of ATMs will be covered by this standard, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last thing is a participant is asking if they can contact you, Chiara, afterwards. It's okay to share, I guess, your contact with them. We can do that later.
Yes,
So yeah, and then there was one question if the deadline for feedback to the draft request is September. Yes, but this is quite a tentative deadline. I mean, there's no fixed dates, but once they are available, you will know, we will share with you. And I think we managed actually to answer all the questions. Great timing. I don't know what happened with Malin. I'm sorry that she had to drop off, but I just want to thank you both, and also Malin also for the great presentations. I think they were very informative. Thank you to all the participants for joining us today. I hope you found this useful. We will, as I said in the chat already, we will share the presentation after, and over the summer, we will make the recording available and upload it on our website, because we think this workshop could be useful to review in the coming period when you start engaging in the work. Don't hesitate to be in touch with us if you have any more questions. I thank also our interpreters today, Lisa and Gerdinand, and also Wim for doing the captioning, and also my colleagues Raquel and Marie, who were helping us in the background. I hope you all have a nice afternoon, and see you in our next event sometime. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.